Hi, my name is Leonie, I'm from Spines and Splines, and this is an artwork I made a couple of years ago called The Welcome Stranger. It is a multi-plate screen print and woodblock print on paper, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how and why I made it. Now, this is the Welcome Stranger that is referred to in the title of the artwork. And the Welcome Stranger was the largest alluvial gold nugget ever found, and it was discovered on the goldfields in central Victoria in Australia in 1869. You might be wondering why the gold nugget in the artwork doesn't look the same as the actual Welcome Stranger, and that is because the gold nugget in my artwork is not a gold nugget. It's something called a dim sim, which is a uniquely Australian snack. Now, like pretty much everyone in Australia, as a kid, I thought that dim sims were Chinese. Meat pies were Australian, lamingtons were Australian, pavlovas were Australian, even though the New Zealanders will argue that they're not. But dim sims were mysterious and exciting and very definitely Asian. Then in 2017, I moved from Australia to Ireland and very quickly discovered that dim sims are definitely Australian and you cannot find them anywhere outside Australia and New Zealand. If you look up a recipe for making dim sims from somebody who lives in Australia, they will say go to the supermarket, buy some dim sims from the freezer and put them in your air fryer. And when you search for actual recipes for how to make them, it's always from people who have emigrated from Australia and are desperately trying to find ways to make dim sims so that they can eat them again. So Ireland has this event called Culture Night that runs nationally once a year to celebrate the arts. And for the events in our town here a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to make some artwork that was specifically about immigration and racism, because we've got some people in town here who are pretty vocal about some pretty horrible fascist things, and I wanted to present an alternative to that. Like, unfortunately, this is something that's happening across the country and across the world, and I felt like this was a way that I could participate to have my say in a positive and constructive way. As an immigrant, I didn't think I could make something specific about the issues that people are facing here now, but I could take my own experiences growing up and make something new that also spoke to the problems people are having here. So I wanted to make the artwork bright and fun and engaging, and any reference to difficult things, which there are difficult things referenced in this work, like the White Australia policy, for example, is very small. It's very prominent in the text, but you don't notice it until you've already engaged with the artwork and you're committed to reading it. So one of my favourite artists, who I've mentioned here on the channel a lot and who was a huge inspiration for these artworks in particular, is Curated, who was a screen printing Catholic nun and educator in Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s. And a lot of her work is very fun and colourful and engaging, but when you look into it a bit more, it can be very challenging, and it's about important political things. So Curated often used the same techniques that I used in these artworks, which is the paper cutout method of screen printing, which is very accessible. You can do it at home. It's a way to make very immediate, fast artwork without needing many resources, which makes it a perfect choice for making art like this. So speaking of not having many resources, one of the reasons that my ancestors emigrated from Ireland to Australia was the Irish famine, which was happening at the same time that the Australian gold rush was starting. They wanted to escape a miserable life here and start fresh in a place where, for a while at least, you could pick up gold from a stream bed. That was obviously only possible at the start of the gold rush, and things got a lot harder later on, but we'll get to that. I grew up in a town called Ballarat, which is pretty central to the story of the goldfields and the gold rush in Australia. And our local theme park, which is more technically a living museum, recreated life on the goldfields, and we would get a family pass every year. We'd take tours through the underground mines. We'd go panning in the little stream that they seeded with gold every morning. And we'd buy raspberry and eucalyptus drops from Brown's Confectionery, which are the best boiled lollies in the whole world. And every time I go back to Ballarat, I get some of those. And all through primary school, I looked forward to these 2 days that I knew were coming in my future because I'd seen my brothers and sisters do this. And that was where we got to go as part of school to the school in Sovereign Hill for 2 days, and we got to wear the full costume, and we would learn how to write with a dip pen, and we would learn about life in the gold rush era. Back then there was a small section of Sovereign Hill that talked about the history of the Chinese miners, but most of the stories were about European miners and the Eureka Rebellion, which was an event that was the catalyst for democratic law in Australia. It turns out, though, that at one point Chinese immigrants made up 1/5 of the population on the goldfields in Victoria. Eventually, due to the extreme extra taxes designed specifically to discourage Chinese immigration, the Chinese people began to land in Robe in South Australia and walk 450 kilometres to central Victoria. And alongside the extra taxes and penalties, they dealt daily with violent racism and distrust from the white population. I mentioned that at the start of the gold rush, it was quite easy to find gold, which was what started the whole thing off. But obviously, as time went on, it got harder and harder to find gold, and gold mining is not a fun activity. It's pretty hard work. And this group that looked different and sounded different and posed a threat because they worked hard and often worked together to share the load, sort of bore the brunt of everybody's anger. So the story was that the Chinese came to the goldfields, found their gold, and then left and went back to China. But the story itself is actually more complicated than that. Like my own ancestors who were escaping famine in Ireland, many of the Chinese immigrants were fleeing civil war and social upheaval in China. And when the gold rush ended, many Chinese people did move on, as did many Europeans, but a lot of people stayed. So when my family went to Australia for the gold rush, they didn't end up searching for gold. They set up a pub, and many Chinese immigrants sort of diversified as well, not necessarily setting up pubs, but a lot of them set up market gardens and grew food and cooked food to feed people on the goldfields. The difference between the white and the Chinese settlers, though, was that while the Eureka Rebellion established democracy in Australia, it also helped pave the way for one of our national shames, which I have hinted at previously, called the White Australia Policy. And if you haven't heard about the White Australia Policy, I'll leave a link below with some information because it's important to understand this history. And the White Australia Policy wasn't officially removed until 1973, so just take a minute and let that sink in. The knock-on effect from this policy is that many children of Chinese immigrants and then their children would not have been told about their own ancestry, would not have necessarily known that they had Chinese ancestry, because this was a way to protect people from political and social rejection. So over this period, the Chinese food that had been eaten on the goldfields had slowly adapted and changed to suit the environment, as all food does over time. So what started out as a small dumpling, a little shumai dumpling, probably about this big, didn't quite become this big, but evolved to be a much more robust thing that was suited to eating in life on the goldfields. So the story is that in 1945, so 90 to 100 years after the gold rush started and long after it had ended, a market gardener and food producer in Melbourne had been making these sort of larger versions of these shumai dumplings. So he stopped to see his friend at the local chip shop while he was making his deliveries, and he decided to leave a box of dim sims with him. So the dim sims would have traditionally been steamed, and the story is because there was no steamer in the chip shop, the man who owned the chip shop threw them into the deep fryer, and that is how dim sims were born. Us Australians often like to complain that we have no food culture of our own and that all our food is just food from other places. But what I think a lot of Australians don't realise is that a lot of our food has adapted and changed over time and is uniquely Australian, and our food culture and our general day-to-day culture is very, very, very heavily based on immigrant culture, and it's something that we really should be proud of and that we should celebrate more. The 2 print editions that I made for this project are available on my website now, and while they're individually called Panning for Gold and The Welcome Stranger, I like to think of them with one sort of overarching title, which is obviously a reference to the phrase, the way to somebody's heart is through their stomach. Making positive change in our communities isn't going to happen by yelling at people, and it's not going to happen by excluding people or pointing at problems without offering a valid, tangible solution. It is more likely to happen though if we find creative ways to celebrate the things that we love about our communities. Instead of trying to chase people away, invite them in. Be bright and vibrant and smart and welcome people instead of chasing them away. Go out into your community and talk to people, not just the ones who look like you. Contribute, volunteer, make a garden and grow some food, either literally or figuratively. Make big, beautiful, bright art that draws people in to learn your story. If you would like to see The Welcome Stranger in person, it will be on show from next week for 2 weeks or so in Dublin. I'll put all the details in the description, but it will be at the MART Gallery as part of the Wonder exhibition at Rathmines in Dublin, and it will run from the 10th of January until the 24th of January 2026. If you can't make it to the exhibition, you can see both The Welcome Stranger and Panning for Gold on my website at www.crumpart.net, where you can go and have a look, and you can also subscribe to my newsletter if you want to find out more about the art that I make. Please like, subscribe and comment on this video, and I will see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.